A 39-year-old millionaire marries a 21-year-old young woman for convenience. But on their wedding night, he discovers her pure innocence and gives himself to true love. Where are you watching us from? If you like love stories, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This story is beautiful. The scent of jasmine and freshly harvested grapes still perfumed the air when Elliot saw Adelaide standing before the window, her wedding dress falling like silk over her delicate shoulders. Her hands trembled as she slowly unfastened the small pearl buttons that adorned the sleeves. At 39, Elliot had built an empire, commanded meetings with an iron fist, and made decisions that moved millions. But in that moment, observing the 21-year-old woman who had become his wife just hours before, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: complete vulnerability. The decisions we make out of duty are often those that most profoundly transform our destiny, he thought as he contemplated Adelaide's profile silhouetted against the Napa Valley twilight. The century-old estate Oak Ridge rose majestically over the hills of California, its stone walls guarding secrets between invisible cracks. That night promised to add another chapter to its history. The marriage had been meticulously arranged by both families, a tradition they had maintained for generations, where alliances were forged through carefully planned unions. She had accepted out of filial duty, he out of necessity for an heir to his wine empire. Both expected simply to fulfill the obligations imposed by their family and social circumstances, to travel together on a pragmatic path without expecting more than mutual cordiality. Neither was prepared for what was about to happen. "May I offer you something?" asked Elliot, breaking the silence that seemed to have solidified between them. Adelaide turned slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the ceremony. "A little time," she responded with a soft but firm voice. "I just need a little time." He nodded, recognizing in that simple request a wisdom that didn't correspond with someone her age. The amber light from the antique lamps cast dancing shadows on both their faces, hiding as much as it revealed. "Time is the one thing we have plenty of," he replied, withdrawing toward the door. "Dinner will be served when you're ready. There's no rush tonight nor in the nights to come." When the door closed behind him, Adelaide let out the breath she had unconsciously been holding. She approached the mahogany dressing table and contemplated her reflection in the antique mirror, wondering what version of herself would emerge from this room at dawn. She was no longer the daughter of a winemaker on the verge of bankruptcy. Now she was Mrs. Blackwood, mistress of an estate she didn't know and wife to a man who seemed an enigma to her. Outside, the sun was finishing its descent behind the mountains, tinting the sky in crimson hues that would soon give way to darkness. In the century-old vineyard, the silver-green leaves swayed with the night breeze, silent witnesses to so many stories that had begun exactly like this, with two strangers united by circumstances beyond their control, destined to discover if duty could, against all odds, transform into something deeper. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the raw cotton curtains when Adelaide awoke in the bed that now belonged to her. Elliot was already gone. He had kept his word to respect her space, sleeping on the divan near the window, maintaining a distance she silently appreciated. After dressing simply, she ventured down the corridors of the estate, following the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She found Elliot in the main dining room, surrounded by financial newspapers and a cup of black coffee. His rigid posture and furrowed brow as he reviewed documents revealed the businessman that all of Napa Valley knew. "Good morning," she murmured, pausing in the doorway as if she needed permission to enter. Elliot raised his gaze, his expression subtly transforming. "Good morning, Adelaide. I hope you rested well." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Please, join me." The conversation during breakfast was minimal and cordial, limited to practical matters: the distribution of rooms, the routines of the house, the formal introduction to the staff who kept the estate running. While they spoke, Adelaide observed each gesture and expression of Elliot's, trying to decipher the man behind the facade of the relentless businessman. "I'll be going out to inspect the vineyards," he announced, consulting his pocket watch. "Martha, the housekeeper, will show you the property. Any changes you wish to make are welcome. This is your home now." When she was alone, Adelaide let out a sigh she didn't know she was holding. The silent tension that floated between them was like an invisible third occupant in every room they shared. The morning passed in a tour of the immense property. Martha, a woman of about 60 with kind eyes and hands calloused by work, showed her every corner of the estate with evident pride. "The master has been very alone for a long time," commented Martha, as she showed her the library. "This house needed a lady." "Why has he been alone?" asked Adelaide, running her fingers over the leather spines of centuries-old books. Martha glanced toward the family portrait that dominated the main wall. "It's not my place to speak of that, ma'am. These are stories that should be told by those who lived them." That afternoon, while exploring the back gardens on her own, Adelaide discovered a small abandoned greenhouse. The plants had grown wild, reclaiming the space between broken glass and rusted structures. Something in that disorder moved her deeply. Without thinking, she began pulling weeds and arranging pots. "No one has entered there in years," Elliot's voice startled her. He stood in the entrance, his silhouette outlined against the evening light. "I'm sorry," she apologized, brushing the soil from her hands. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Don't apologize," he responded, approaching. For an instant, his mask of coldness seemed to crack. "It was my mother's favorite place. After her death, no one had the courage to maintain it." Their gazes met in a moment of unexpected sincerity. "I could revive it," offered Adelaide, surprising herself. With time and care, something indefinable shone in Elliot's eyes. "Like many things in this estate," he murmured. "Perhaps it just needed the right hands." That night, during dinner, the atmosphere between them had subtly changed. The silence was no longer uncomfortable but expectant. As the sun set over the vineyards, both felt the first glimpse of something neither dared to name yet. The possibility that this union of convenience could, against all odds, transform into something authentic. 3 weeks after the wedding, a routine had established itself between them with the precision of an antique clock. Elliot departed at dawn to supervise the estate's operations, returned for lunch, spent the afternoons in his office attending to business matters, and shared dinner with Adelaide before retiring again to work until late hours. During this time, Adelaide had begun to leave small marks of her presence in the house. The greenhouse was coming to life under her daily care. The kitchen, territory she had claimed as her own to the surprise of the staff, now filled with aromas of traditional recipes she remembered from her childhood. That morning, while preparing coffee with a touch of cinnamon and cardamom, according to her family's tradition, she heard raised voices coming from Elliot's office. The partially open door let filter fragments of a heated discussion. "Her prices continue to fall, sir," said a voice she recognized as Morris, the head administrator. "The Central Valley vineyards are flooding the market with cheaper wine." "Sacrificing quality for price has never been our policy," Elliot responded firmly. "The Oak Ridge vineyards have produced the best wine in California for 5 generations. We're not going to change that now." "But the debts are accumulating. If we continue like this—" "I'll find a solution," interrupted Elliot. His tone brooked no reply. "Now leave me the reports." Adelaide moved away silently when she heard footsteps approaching the door. As she returned to the kitchen, an uneasiness settled in her chest. Were they in economic trouble? Was this the reason why Elliot had accepted an arranged marriage with the daughter of a small wine producer? During lunch, she observed Elliot with new eyes. The lines of tension around his mouth, the barely perceptible dark circles, the way his gaze lost itself in the distance. These were signs she had overlooked. "Is everything all right with the business?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. Elliot looked up, surprised. "Why do you ask?" "I've been observing you," she responded simply. "You seem worried." He studied her for a long moment, as if reconsidering his image of her. "These are normal market fluctuations," he finally responded. "Nothing you should worry about." "My father used to say that too," she commented, holding his gaze. "Just before our family business began to crumble." A tense silence settled between them. Elliot set down his cutlery with deliberate slowness. "What do you know about business, Adelaide?" The question could have sounded condescending, but there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "More than you might imagine," she replied. "I grew up listening to conversations about harvests, market prices, and distribution strategies. I may not have your experience, but I understand when something isn't going well." Elliot looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Before he could respond, Martha entered, announcing the arrival of an unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Vivian is here, sir." The change in Elliot's face was instantaneous. An expression Adelaide couldn't interpret crossed his features before he recovered his usual composure. "Show her to the main parlour," he ordered, rising. He turned to Adelaide. "My sister has arrived. I wasn't expecting her until next week." The woman who entered the room had the same imposing presence as Elliot. Tall, elegant, with black hair pulled back in an austere bun, Vivian Blackwood scrutinized Adelaide with calculating eyes before addressing her brother. "So this is your young wife," she commented, her tone oscillating between curiosity and skepticism. "Interesting choice, Elliot. Very interesting." The tension in the room became palpable. Adelaide straightened her back, facing the evaluation without being intimidated. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vivian," she said with a polite smile. "Elliot has told me much about you." "I doubt my brother has shared anything significant," Vivian responded, accepting the cup of tea that Martha offered. "Secrets are our family's specialty, aren't they, Elliot?" The look the siblings exchanged contained years of unspoken history. Adelaide felt she was witnessing the tip of an iceberg whose main mass remained hidden beneath deep waters. "How long will you honor us with your presence, Vivian?" asked Elliot, deliberately ignoring her comment. "Long enough to get to know my new sister-in-law better," she responded, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "After all, she has entered the family at an interesting time." The rest of the afternoon passed in superficially cordial conversation, but Adelaide perceived the undercurrents flowing between the Blackwood siblings. When Vivian finally retired to her room, citing travel fatigue, Elliot remained silent, contemplating the flames in the fireplace. "Your sister doesn't approve of our marriage," commented Adelaide, sitting across from him. "Vivian doesn't approve of anything that wasn't her idea," Elliot responded with a tired smile. Then, in an unexpected gesture, he took Adelaide's hand in his. "Don't let her intimidate you. It's her way of protecting me." "Protecting you from what?" Elliot released her hand slowly. "From making the same mistakes." He stood, ending the conversation. "It's late. We should rest." That night, as she listened to Elliot's measured breathing in the adjoining room, Adelaide realized she had entered a family with deep wounds that had not yet healed. The shadow of the past projected itself over her present, and if she wanted to build a future in this estate, she would have to learn to navigate between secrets that no one seemed willing to reveal. Vivian's visit extended longer than expected, turning the estate's atmosphere into an emotional minefield where each conversation seemed to contain invisible traps. Adelaide observed with growing frustration how Elliot retreated to his old armor in his sister's presence, undoing the small advances of intimacy they had achieved in the previous weeks. One afternoon, as Adelaide returned from the greenhouse with a bouquet of aromatic herbs for the kitchen, she heard raised voices coming from Elliot's office. She paused, divided between discretion and curiosity. "Do you really believe she's different?" Vivian's voice sounded incredulous. "They're all the same when they discover the money is running out. Remember Diana." "Adelaide has nothing to do with Diana," Elliot responded, his tense voice containing itself. "And I would appreciate if you wouldn't mention that name in my house." "Your blindness worries me, brother," insisted Vivian. "This girl is 21 years old. What could she want from a man like you if not for your fortune?" "A fortune that's disappearing faster than I can control," Elliot responded with bitterness. Adelaide held her breath. It confirmed her suspicions. The financial situation was serious. "All the more reason to protect yourself," continued Vivian. "Have you told her the truth about our father, about how he really ended up?" "Enough, Vivian." Elliot's voice was definitive. "My marriage is my business." Adelaide moved away silently, her mind processing fragments of information that, like pieces of an incomplete puzzle, were beginning to form a partial image. Diana. Who was she? And what dark secret surrounded Elliot's father? That night, an unexpected storm lashed the region. The wind howled against the estate's windows, and lightning intermittently illuminated the rooms, projecting ghostly shadows on the walls. Past midnight, unable to sleep, Adelaide headed to the library in search of a book to distract her. To her surprise, she found Elliot sitting in the dimness, completely motionless as thunder rumbled in the distance. His rigid posture and fixed gaze on the window revealed a state she hadn't witnessed before. "Elliot," she called softly. He didn't respond immediately, as if it took time to register her presence. When he finally turned toward her, Adelaide saw something that disconcerted her, genuine fear in his eyes. "You shouldn't be awake at this hour," he said, trying to recover his usual composure. A particularly close lightning strike illuminated the room, followed by an ear-splitting thunderclap. Elliot visibly shuddered, closing his eyes for an instant. Sudden understanding illuminated Adelaide's mind. Without a word, she approached and sat beside him. She offered no comments or questions, simply took a book from the side table and began to read aloud. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Her soft voice flowed through the room, creating a sonic refuge against the exterior storm. She continued reading passage after passage of Pride and Prejudice, observing how tension gradually left Elliot's shoulders. After almost an hour, when the storm began to move away, he finally spoke. "My father died during a storm like this," he said quietly, not looking at her directly. "An accident in the vineyards. I was 8 years old." Adelaide closed the book slowly. "I'm so sorry." "Vivian and I were with him," he continued, as if he needed to discharge a long-held weight. "She was 12. We had taken shelter under a century-old oak when lightning struck. We had no time to react." The silence that followed was laden with meaning. Adelaide understood that he was offering her something precious, a fragment of truth, a piece of his closely guarded interior. "Since then," he added, looking again toward the window, "storms remind me that everything can change in an instant." In an instinctive gesture, Adelaide took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. To her surprise, Elliot didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined in the dimness, forming a fragile but significant bridge. "We all have interior storms," she murmured, "some more visible than others." He looked at her with renewed intensity. "What are yours, Adelaide? What storms inhabit you?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her deep fears or yearnings. "I fear discovering I'm not enough," she finally confessed. "That everything I offer, my presence here, my efforts to adapt, my will to build something meaningful, turns out to be inadequate." "Inadequate for what?" "To justify my place in this house, in your life." The raw honesty floated between them like a living being. Elliot held her gaze for what seemed an eternity. "Perhaps we've both been measuring value with the wrong parameters," he finally responded. They remained like that, hands intertwined in silence as the storm moved away and the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Something fundamental had changed between them. The unspoken words weighed as much as those pronounced, but for the first time the shared silence wasn't a barrier, but a space of possibilities. The day after the storm brought an unusual clarity. From the estate's hills, Napa Valley extended like a canvas of deep greens and golden fields under an intensely blue sky. Adelaide breathed deeply the purified air, feeling that something within her had also cleared. Vivian's departure that morning had relieved the tension in the house, but had left questions in its wake that demanded answers. During breakfast, Elliot seemed distant again, as if the intimacy shared during the stormy night had been a temporary parenthesis. "I'll be absent for a few days," he announced, avoiding her gaze. "I must travel to San Francisco to meet with the distributors." Adelaide nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "When will you return?" "Probably Friday." He stood, consulting his watch. "Martha will attend to anything you need." Before he could leave, Adelaide stopped him with a direct question. "Who is Diana?" Elliot froze, his back suddenly tense. When he turned to her, his expression had hardened. "Have you been listening to private conversations?" "Not intentionally," she responded, holding his gaze. "But I live in this house, Elliot, and if we're going to build something together, whatever that something is, I need to understand the ghosts that inhabit it." For a long moment it seemed he would refuse to answer. Finally he sighed and sat down again. "Diana was my first wife," he confessed in a controlled voice. "Our marriage lasted barely 2 years." Adelaide felt as if she'd been doused with cold water. "I didn't know you had been married before." "Few people know. It was 12 years ago." "What happened?" she asked softly. Elliot looked toward the vineyards through the window. "An economic crisis hit the wine market. We faced considerable losses. Diana—" He paused, searching for words. "She wasn't prepared for difficult times. One day she simply left, taking with her a substantial amount of our financial reserves." The revelation floated between them, heavy with implications. "I'm so sorry," Adelaide said sincerely. "It's ancient history," he responded, rising again, "but it explains why Vivian is cautious. And why you keep everyone at a distance," she added. Their gazes met in a moment of mutual understanding. "I must go," he said finally. "The car is waiting." When Elliot departed, Adelaide remained contemplating the estate with new eyes. Now she understood better the invisible currents flowing beneath the apparently tranquil surface of this family. During the following days, an idea began to form in her mind. If the financial problems were as serious as she suspected, perhaps she could contribute in some way. She wasn't an expert in business, but she had grown up hearing her father discuss strategies and markets. Determined, she headed to Elliot's office. She had never entered this space alone, considering it private territory. The room smelled of leather, old wood, and the characteristic aroma of wine she associated with him. She sat before the imposing desk and began to review the carefully ordered documents. The numbers confirmed her worst suspicions. The estate faced a serious crisis. Production costs were increasing while international wine prices fell. Competition from Central Valley and even Oregon was conquering markets traditionally dominated by Napa Valley. If they continued like this, in less than 2 years, they would be on the verge of bankruptcy. Among the documents, she found references to proposals for partial land sales. Elliot was considering selling ancestral vineyards to keep the business afloat. There must be another solution, she murmured to herself. She spent the next 3 days immersed in research. She visited the town's public library, consulted specialized publications, and even discreetly contacted old school friends who now worked in tourism. The night before Elliot's return, while organizing her notes in the library, she had an epiphany. The problem wasn't the quality of the product. Oak Ridge wine continued to be exceptional, but its marketing in a changing market. When she heard the car approaching up the driveway, Adelaide felt a nervousness she hadn't experienced since her wedding day. What she was about to propose could definitively change the dynamic between them. Elliot entered the estate with a somber expression. The meetings in San Francisco evidently hadn't gone well. "Welcome," she greeted him, standing in the entrance hall. "How was the trip?" "Exhausting and fruitless," he responded, loosening his tie. "The distributors are demanding lower prices. It's impossible to compete without sacrificing quality." "I have something to show you," said Adelaide. "When you've rested, of course." He looked at her curiously. "What's happened?" "It's an idea about the business." Elliot frowned. "Have you been reviewing my business documents?" "Yes," she responded frankly. "And before you get upset, please listen to me." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "I'm listening." An hour later, they were in the office, surrounded by the documents and notes Adelaide had prepared. She spoke with a passion and clarity that surprised them both. "The problem isn't the product, but how we're offering it," she explained. "Wine tourism is growing exponentially in California. People don't just want to buy fine wine, they want to live the complete experience." She unfolded on the desk a detailed plan to transform part of the estate into a wine tourism destination. Guided tours through the century-old vineyards, tastings, workshops on traditional winemaking techniques, even boutique accommodations in the estate's underutilized wings. "We could diversify without compromising tradition," she continued. "In fact, we would transform that tradition into our most valuable asset." Elliot listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Adelaide finished her presentation, a heavy silence filled the room. "Where did you learn all this?" he finally asked. She blushed slightly. "I've always been interested in the family business, although my father considered it not women's business. I've been studying on my own for years." Elliot stood and approached the window, contemplating the vineyards bathed in evening light. "What you propose is a radical transformation," he said finally. "It would completely change the way the estate has functioned for generations." "Sometimes radical changes are needed to preserve the essential," she responded, standing beside him. "The vines will continue producing the same exceptional wine. We would simply be adding new dimensions to its value." When he turned to look at her, there was something new in his eyes, respect mixed with something deeper that Adelaide didn't dare to name. "It's an audacious proposal," he conceded, "and risky." "Riskier is to continue as we have been," she responded softly. "Selling ancestral lands to maintain a business model that no longer works." Her words seemed to hit him like a physical truth. He nodded slowly. "We'll implement it," he decided, "but we'll do it together, as partners." The word partners floated between them, laden with new possibilities. Adelaide extended her hand and Elliot shook it firmly, sealing much more than a business agreement. In that moment, under the golden evening light of Napa Valley, both understood they had crossed a threshold. What had begun as a marriage of convenience was transforming into a true alliance based on mutual respect and a shared purpose. "Tomorrow we'll begin planning the details," said Elliot, still holding her hand. "We have much work ahead." "Together," responded Adelaide, with a smile that illuminated her eyes. "Together," he confirmed. The following months brought visible transformations to Oak Ridge Estate. What had begun as an audacious idea was gradually materializing under the joint supervision of Elliot and Adelaide. The old barn was renovated and converted into a space for tastings and workshops. Several rooms in the East Wing, unoccupied for decades, were transformed into boutique accommodations that respected the estate's traditional architecture while offering modern comforts. The greenhouse, completely restored by Adelaide, had become the starting point for tours of the property. There, visitors could learn about the traditional aromatic herbs of the region before venturing into the century-old vineyards. One April morning, while supervising the installation of a new irrigation system in the gardens, Adelaide noticed Elliot observing her with a particular intensity. "Is something wrong?" she asked, brushing aside a lock of hair that the spring breeze had disordered. "I was thinking," he responded, "about how you've transformed this place in just 5 months." She smiled, looking around. "We've transformed it together." "I don't just mean the physical renovations," he clarified. "I'm talking about the energy, the life you've brought back. This estate had been functioning by inertia for too long." His comment moved her deeply. "Perhaps it just needed a renewed purpose," she suggested. "Like all of us at some point." Their gazes met, communicating much more than words. The emotional distance that had initially separated them had decreased considerably. Working together on a shared project had created a bond neither had anticipated. "The first group of visitors will arrive in 2 weeks," commented Elliot, subtly changing the subject. "We should finalize the last details." As they walked toward the house, Adelaide felt a sudden wave of nausea that forced her to stop. She leaned against a grapevine, breathing deeply. "Are you all right?" The concern in Elliot's voice was evident. "Just a dizzy spell," she responded, trying to smile. "Probably the heat." He frowned, unconvinced. "You've been working too hard. You should rest more." "I'm fine, truly," she insisted, straightening up. "We have so much to do." In reality, it was the 3rd dizzy spell in a week, and Adelaide was beginning to suspect its cause. She wasn't ready yet to share her suspicions, not when so many things were at stake and the estate's transformation was just beginning. That afternoon, while reviewing the menus for the culinary workshops, Martha's voice startled her. "You should consult a doctor, ma'am," said the housekeeper, observing her with knowing eyes. "These morning dizzy spells have a pretty clear meaning for those who've seen this before." Adelaide looked up, surprised. "Is it that obvious?" Martha smiled warmly. "For someone who's lived long enough, yes." "How long have you suspected?" "A few weeks," confessed Adelaide. "But with everything happening at the estate, it didn't seem the right time." "The time is never perfectly right for big news," responded Martha, sitting across from her. "Life doesn't wait for our convenience." Adelaide set down the pencil with which she was taking notes, facing the reality she had been postponing. "How do you think he'll take it?" she asked quietly. Martha considered the question seriously. "Mr. Elliot has carried many burdens and some scars run deep, but I've seen him change since you arrived." She paused significantly. "The way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. There's hope there, ma'am. Hope I hadn't seen in him for many years." Martha's words resonated in Adelaide's mind during the following days. Meanwhile, preparations for the opening continued at an accelerated pace. Elliot had contacted tourism agencies specializing in luxury gastronomic experiences, and the first reservations were beginning to arrive. One afternoon, while working in the office reviewing promotional materials, Adelaide noticed Elliot seemed unusually distracted. "Are you worried about the opening?" she asked. He shook his head. "It's not that. I was thinking about my father." The mention of his father, a rarely addressed topic, immediately captured her attention. "He was always a traditionalist," continued Elliot. He firmly believed the only path was to keep things exactly as they had been done for generations. Any suggestion of change was received as a betrayal of the family legacy. Adelaide listened attentively, understanding the importance of the moment. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this," he said, pointing to the plans and brochures scattered on the desk, "of how we're reinventing his estate." "I think he would be proud," she responded with conviction. "We're not abandoning tradition, we're adapting it to survive in a changing world. That takes courage." Elliot looked at her intently. "You have a particular way of seeing clearly what takes others years to understand." Propelled by the moment, Adelaide decided it was time to share her secret. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, feeling her heart accelerate. "Something important." The sudden sound of the telephone interrupted them. Elliot answered, his expression rapidly transforming. "When did it happen?" he asked, rising. "I understand. I'll come immediately." When he hung up, his face reflected concern. "That was from the hospital in San Francisco. Vivian has had a car accident." "Is it serious?" asked Adelaide, alarmed. "Apparently just fractures and contusions, but I must go." He began gathering his things hurriedly. "I'll return as soon as possible." "I'll go with you," Adelaide offered immediately. Elliot paused, visibly surprised by the offer. The relationship between Adelaide and Vivian had been cordial but distant since that first visit. "You don't need to trouble yourself," he responded. "You know how Vivian is." "She's your sister," said Adelaide simply, "and now she's my family too." Something in her expression deeply moved Elliot. He nodded, accepting her support. During the drive to San Francisco, Adelaide observed Elliot's tense profile as he drove. She understood that despite their frequent disagreements, the bond between the Blackwood siblings was deep and unbreakable. Both had shared the traumatic experience of losing their father in tragic circumstances, forming a defensive alliance against the world. At the hospital, they found Vivian conscious but visibly affected. Her left arm was in a cast, and multiple bruises marked her usually impeccable face. When she saw Adelaide enter alongside Elliot, an expression of genuine surprise crossed her features. "I didn't expect to see you here," she commented, as Elliot approached to kiss her forehead. "We're family," responded Adelaide simply, approaching the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I argued with an oak tree and the oak tree won," responded Vivian, with a flash of her usual sarcasm. Elliot smiled, relieved. "If you can joke, it means you'll recover soon." The following hours revealed a new dimension in the family dynamic. While Elliot managed the medical and administrative matters, Adelaide remained at Vivian's side, offering companionship and practical assistance. To her surprise, she found Elliot's sister more vulnerable and accessible in these circumstances. "You know," commented Vivian during a moment alone, "when Elliot announced your marriage, I was convinced it was another monumental mistake." Adelaide maintained a neutral expression, waiting. "I've been protecting him since we were children," continued Vivian, "especially after what happened with Diana. Seeing him destroyed was—" She paused, searching for words. "It was like losing my brother a second time." "I understand," responded Adelaide softly. "Your intention has always been to protect him." Vivian studied her with renewed interest. "You're changing him. The estate, the business. Him himself. I'm not sure if that reassures me or terrifies me." "Change always frightens," reflected Adelaide. "But sometimes it's necessary to heal." Something indefinable shone in Vivian's eyes. "Perhaps," she finally conceded. When they returned to the estate 3 days later, with Vivian temporarily installed in one of the guest rooms while she recovered, Adelaide felt that another invisible wall had begun to crack. Adversity had created a space for more authentic connections among the three. That night, as they prepared for bed, Elliot approached Adelaide and took her hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being there, for seeing my sister as family when she hasn't always treated you as such." Adelaide smiled, recognizing the moment as another threshold in their relationship. "Before the hospital call," recalled Elliot, "you mentioned there was something important you wanted to tell me." Adelaide's heart accelerated. With everything that had happened, she had postponed her revelation again. Now, looking into the eyes of the man who had gone from stranger to true companion, she gathered courage. "I'm pregnant," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Elliot's face transformed slowly, a mixture of emotions crossing his features. Surprise, bewilderment, And finally, an almost reverent amazement. "A child," he murmured, as if the words themselves were fragile. She nodded, holding her breath as she awaited his complete reaction. In an unexpected movement, Elliot knelt before her, resting his forehead against Adelaide's still flat belly. The gesture, so vulnerable and sincere, brought tears to her eyes. "A new life," he whispered. "A new opportunity." When he raised his face to look at her, Adelaide saw tears in his eyes too. In that moment, she understood that the seeds of change they had planted were blossoming into something much deeper and more enduring than a simple marital agreement. Oak Ridge Estate wasn't just transforming into a new type of business, it was becoming a true home. The announcement of the pregnancy brought a subtle but significant change to the estate's dynamic. Elliot, habitually reserved with his emotions, began to show a protective side that bordered on excessive. He personally supervised Adelaide's diet, reorganized his schedule to reduce her workload, and even hired a doctor from San Francisco for weekly visits, despite her protests that she was perfectly fine. "It's excessive, Elliot," she commented one morning over breakfast. "I'm only in the 3rd month. I can continue working normally." He looked at her over his coffee cup, his expression serious. "I don't want to take risks. This pregnancy is—" He paused, searching for words. "It's important." Adelaide understood what he wasn't saying. For a man who had lost so much, the possibility of creating a family represented a new and terrifying vulnerability. His overprotection was a way of controlling fear. "I understand," she responded softly. "But I need to continue being an active part of the project. It helps me stay centered and positive." Before Elliot could respond, Vivian entered the dining room, moving carefully due to her arm still in a cast. Although her recovery was progressing well, she had decided to extend her stay at the estate. To everyone's surprise, including her own, her presence had proven beneficial for the preparations for the wine tourism opening. "Good morning to the future parents," she greeted, pouring herself a cup of tea. "Elliot, the carpenters need your approval for the final design of the tasting room." He nodded, visibly divided between his business responsibilities and his desire to remain close to Adelaide. "Go," she encouraged him. "I'll be in the greenhouse organizing the herbs for the culinary workshops." Sedentary and relaxing activity, I promise. When Elliot left, Vivian sat across from Adelaide with an evaluating look. "My brother is terrified," she commented directly. "I've never seen him like this, not even during the worst financial crises." Adelaide sighed. "I know. I try to give him space to process his emotions, but his overprotection is becoming suffocating." "It's understandable," responded Vivian, surprising her with her empathetic tone. "When our father died, Elliot assumed responsibilities that no child should carry. He became the man of the house too soon. He has always felt he must control everything to keep safe those who matter to him." "And then there was Diana," added Adelaide cautiously. Vivian looked at her with renewed respect. "I see he finally told you about her." "Not much," admitted Adelaide. "I know she abandoned him in a difficult moment, taking money." Vivian gave a bitter laugh. "A very simplified version. Diana destroyed more than his finances. She broke his confidence in himself as a man and as a protector. She made him believe he had fundamentally failed." These revelations shed new light on Elliot's behavior. Adelaide understood with greater clarity the fears that drove him. "How can I help him overcome that fear without pushing him away?" she asked sincerely. Vivian considered the question seriously. "By demonstrating that you don't need to be constantly saved or protected, that you're strong on your own, but choose to be with him. It's an important distinction for someone like Elliot." The conversation with Vivian resonated deeply with Adelaide. During the following days, she sought a delicate balance, accepting Elliot's concern without allowing it to limit her participation in the estate's life. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of new equipment in the kitchen for the gastronomic workshops, she noticed Elliot observing her from the doorway with a worried expression. "You should rest," he suggested, approaching. "You've been on your feet all morning." Instead of arguing, Adelaide took his hand and placed it on her slightly rounded belly. "We're fine," she assured him firmly. "Your child and I are strong, Elliot. Trust in that." Something in her words seemed to reach him deeply. His eyes, usually vigilant, softened. "It's difficult," he admitted quietly. "Every time I imagine the happiness we could have, I remember all the ways I could lose it." The raw honesty of his confession deeply moved Adelaide. She approached, taking his face between her hands. "Fear doesn't prevent loss," she responded softly. "It only prevents living fully. And this child deserves parents who live without fear." In the days leading up to the official inauguration of the wine tourism, tension at the estate reached almost palpable levels. The final details were being completed against the clock, reservations were increasing faster than anticipated, and pressure on Elliot grew exponentially. Adelaide observed him gradually retreating to old patterns, sleepless nights reviewing figures, skipped meals, and a tendency to assume all responsibilities. One night, she found him in the office surrounded by documents, his face marked by exhaustion. "You should rest," she suggested, repeating the same words he constantly said to her. Elliot barely looked up. "There's too much at stake. If this fails—" "It won't fail," she interrupted with conviction. "We've created something special here." He finally looked at her, and Adelaide saw the weight of expectations reflected in his eyes. "I've been here before, Adelaide. I've seen how promising projects crumble due to factors we can't control. The economy, the weather, competition. The difference," she responded, approaching, "is that this time you're not facing it alone." She sat beside him and began reviewing the documents, pointing out positive aspects he had overlooked in his state of anxiety. The bookings filled for the first 3 months, the favorable articles in gastronomic tourism publications, the interest of several luxury travel agencies. Gradually, the tension in Elliot's shoulders began to diminish. When he finally closed the folder of documents, he had recovered some of his composure. "Thank you," he said simply. "Partners, remember?" She responded with a smile. The day of the inauguration dawned with a perfectly blue sky over Napa Valley. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the century-old vineyards, creating an almost dreamlike landscape. Adelaide watched from the window as the staff made final preparations to receive the guests, journalists, travel agents, and influential figures in the tourism sector. She felt Elliot approach from behind, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. She turned to look at him. Dressed in a dark suit and white shirt, he emanated a serene elegance that contrasted with his recent anxiety. Something had changed in him overnight. "More than ready," she responded. "And you?" "I think I finally am," he said with a genuine smile. "Last night I understood something important while watching you sleep. This child," he delicately placed his hand on Adelaide's belly, "isn't a terrifying responsibility. It's an opportunity to do things differently, to break patterns that have limited this family for generations." The depth of his reflection moved her. "What patterns?" "The constant fear of losing what we love," he responded. "My father lived like that, always worried, always controlling, never truly enjoying the present because he was too busy protecting himself from the future. I followed in his footsteps without questioning it." He paused, his eyes reflecting a new clarity. "I don't want to transmit that legacy to our child." Adelaide felt tears of emotion accumulating in her eyes. "It's the best gift you could give him," she murmured, resting her forehead against his. The sound of vehicles approaching up the driveway announced the arrival of the first guests. It was time to present the new vision of Oak Ridge Estate to the world. As they descended the main staircase together, Vivian awaited them in the entrance hall. Her arm, now free of the cast, though still with limited mobility, didn't prevent her from projecting her usual imposing presence in an elegant navy blue dress. "They've arrived," she announced. Then, in an unexpected gesture, she approached and briefly embraced Adelaide. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," she said quietly. "Both of you." With the doors open and the sun flooding the stone courtyard, Elliot, Adelaide, and Vivian welcomed their guests as a united family for the first time. Oak Ridge Estate was beginning a new era, and with it, the Blackwoods were taking a decisive step toward a future built not on the fear of past losses, but on the hope of what was to come. The initial success of the wine tourism exceeded all expectations. During the first 3 months, Oak Ridge Estate became a coveted destination among lovers of traditional California cuisine and enthusiasts of experiential tourism. Glowing reviews in specialized publications attracted visitors from all over the country, and reservations already extended into the following spring. This success, however, began to exact an unexpected price. Workdays stretched well into the night. Elliot, although he had learned to delegate some responsibilities, continued to involve himself personally in every aspect of the business, from supervising wine production to managing visitor groups. Adelaide, now in her 5th month of pregnancy, maintained an equally demanding pace. Her now clearly visible belly didn't prevent her from personally directing the culinary workshops that had become one of the estate's main attractions. Doctors had recommended she reduce her activity, but the passion for the project she had helped create drove her to continue. One suffocating August afternoon, while conducting a workshop for a group of tourists from New York, Adelaide felt a sudden dizziness that forced her to hold on to the edge of the table. The sensation passed quickly, but didn't escape Martha's attentive gaze, who immediately approached to help her. "You need to rest, Ma'am," insisted the housekeeper when the visitors had left. "You're overexerting yourself." "I'm fine," Adelaide responded automatically, although accumulated fatigue was beginning to manifest in dark circles under her eyes. "I just need a moment." Martha looked at her with maternal concern. "Mr. Elliot and you are maintaining an impossible pace. The child you carry in your womb needs tranquility, not constant exhaustion." Martha's words resonated with Adelaide more than she wanted to admit. That night, as they dined in relative silence, both evidently exhausted, she tried to address the issue. "Perhaps we should consider hiring more staff," she suggested cautiously, "at least temporarily." Elliot frowned, setting his cutlery on his plate. "Has there been complaints about the service?" "It's not about that," she responded. "It's about us, our pace. It's not sustainable, especially now." She instinctively placed a hand on her belly. Elliot's expression softened momentarily, but a flash of concern crossed his gaze. "The first months are crucial for establishing our reputation. If we lower the standard now, it will be difficult to recover it." "I'm not talking about lowering standards, but taking care of ourselves," insisted Adelaide. "Martha mentioned to me that you barely sleep 5 hours a night." "Martha should mind her own responsibilities," he responded in a sharper tone than usual. The silence that followed was laden with tension. It was the first time in months they had experienced this type of distancing, and both seemed surprised by it. "I'm sorry," Elliot apologized finally. "I shouldn't speak like that. It's just that—" He paused, running a hand through his hair with a tired gesture. "There's so much at stake. The loan we requested for the renovations, the contracts with travel agencies, the distributors who are carefully observing if this new approach works." "I know," she responded softly. "Precisely why we should take care of ourselves. This project needs us to be at our best, not exhausted to the limit." Elliot nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her words. "You're right. I'll speak with Morris tomorrow to reorganize some responsibilities." However, the following days didn't bring the expected relief. New challenges arose when a report in a travel magazine mentioned the estate's history, including references to the turbulent past of the Blackwood family and vaguely alluding to the failure of Elliot's first marriage. Elliot's reaction to reading the article was visceral. Adelaide found him in the office, his face pale with fury as he held the magazine with trembling hands. "How dare they," he murmured, "turn our private life into entertainment for their readers?" Adelaide approached cautiously. "It's just one paragraph in an otherwise positive article," she tried to reason. "Most readers won't even pay attention to that detail." "You don't understand," he exclaimed, his voice rising unusually. "This is exactly what I feared. Opening the doors means exposing ourselves to this type of intrusion, to turning our lives into material for gossip." The vehemence of his reaction surprised her. "Elliot, no one is interested in gossip about events from more than a decade ago." "You don't know this world like I do," he responded, his tone suddenly distant. "Once they start, they don't stop. Soon someone will unearth the complete story of Diana, the sordid details, the accusations." "What accusations?" asked Adelaide, feeling there was something more he had never shared. Elliot stopped abruptly, as if he had said too much. He passed a hand over his face, visibly trying to recover his composure. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "They're old stories that don't deserve to be revived." The incident left a subtle but perceptible crack in their relationship. Elliot began to distance himself again, spending more hours in the office and less time sharing his concerns with Adelaide. His overprotection toward her continued, but now from an emotional distance that felt painfully familiar. The situation worsened when, during a guided tour of the vineyards, one of the tourists, a journalist in disguise as they later discovered, began asking direct questions about Elliot's personal history and the circumstances of his marriage to Adelaide. "Is it true this marriage was arranged for economic reasons?" asked the man with feigned innocence. "And how do you feel being the second wife of a man who once lost his fortune by trusting too much?" Adelaide, caught by surprise but maintaining her composure, had responded with dignity. "Our marriage is a private matter, and the estate's history that we share with our visitors refers to the winemaking tradition of the region, not speculations about personal lives." The incident, although handled with elegance, left Elliot deeply affected. That night she found him packing documents in his office. "What are you doing?" she asked, observing the frantic activity with growing alarm. "I'm going to San Francisco," he responded, without looking up. "I need to meet with our lawyers to establish stricter privacy policies and confidentiality agreements for visitors." "Aren't you overreacting a bit?" she suggested cautiously. Elliot stopped, finally looking at her. "Overreacting? That man harassed you with personal questions in front of a group of strangers. He put you in an impossible position." "And I handled the situation," she responded firmly. "I don't need you to protect me from uncomfortable questions." "It's not just about you now," he responded, his gaze shifting to her belly. "It's about our child. What will happen when he's born? Do you want him to grow up exposed to this type of intrusion? To strangers speculating about the circumstances of our family?" The genuine fear in his voice moved Adelaide, but also awakened a growing frustration. "We can't control what others do or say, Elliot, only how we respond. Hand-locking ourselves behind walls of isolation again isn't the answer." "You don't understand," he insisted, resuming his task of packing documents. "You don't know how the press can be when they find a story they consider juicy. What Diana did—" "Then explain it to me," interrupted Adelaide, her patience wearing thin. "What really happened with Diana? What is so terrible that you fear will be discovered?" Elliot froze, his hands suspended over the documents. The silence extended between them like a growing abyss. "I can't talk about that now," he responded finally, closing his briefcase with a sharp snap. "The car is waiting. I'll return in a couple of days." When the door closed behind him, Adelaide felt a desolation she hadn't experienced since those first weeks at the estate. The invisible walls she had worked so hard to tear down seemed to be rebuilding themselves around her. That night, alone in the immense bed they now habitually shared, Adelaide felt the baby move for the first time. A gentle flutter, like the brush of a butterfly from within. The emotion of the moment mingled with a deep sadness at not being able to share it with Elliot. "Your father loves you," she whispered to her belly. "He just needs to remember that love can't flourish behind walls that are too high." As the moon illuminated the century-old vineyards through the window, Adelaide made a decision. When Elliot returned, they would face together the ghosts of the past that continued to cast shadows over their present. To build a truly new future, they would first have to free the chains of old, unresolved stories. Elliot's 2 days of absence transformed into a week. The brief telephone calls they maintained revealed little: meetings with lawyers, consultations with public relations specialists, matters in San Francisco that seemed to multiply mysteriously. Each conversation ended with promises of imminent return that were continually postponed. The estate continued functioning with apparent normality under Adelaide's supervision and Vivian's unexpected collaboration, who had assumed some administrative responsibilities with surprising efficiency. Despite their initial differences, the two women had developed a mutual understanding based on respect and a shared objective: to keep the project afloat, while Elliot battled with his personal demons. One afternoon, while they reviewed together the reservations for the following month in the library, Vivian observed Adelaide with an evaluating expression. "You miss him," she commented, not as a question but as a statement. Adelaide nodded, seeing no need to dissimulate. "And I worry about him. I've never seen him react like this, not even in the most tense moments." Vivian closed the reservation folder, a decision visibly forming in her mind. "There's something you should know," she said finally. "Something my brother probably will never tell you of his own accord." The seriousness in her voice immediately captured Adelaide's attention. "About Diana?" "About what really happened when his marriage ended," confirmed Vivian. "The version you know is incomplete." Adelaide's heart accelerated. For months she had felt there was a crucial piece of the puzzle that would explain many of Elliot's behaviors. "Tell me," she asked simply. Vivian stood, approaching the window that looked out on the vineyards. For a moment she seemed to hesitate, as if reconsidering the wisdom of sharing such closely guarded family secrets. "Diana didn't just abandon Elliot taking money," she finally began. "What she did was much more devastating. While Elliot struggled to save the family business during the crisis, Diana maintained a relationship with a financial journalist. She leaked confidential information about the company's difficulties, data the journalist used to publish a devastating article." Adelaide listened attentively, beginning to understand the depth of the trauma. "The article not only exposed the financial vulnerability of Oak Ridge Vineyards," continued Vivian, "but included insinuations about supposed misappropriation of funds by Elliot to keep the business afloat. Although the accusations were unfounded, the damage to his reputation was immediate. Several business partners withdrew their support, fearing being splashed by a possible scandal." "Why would Diana do something like that?" asked Adelaide, genuinely disconcerted. "Revenge," responded Vivian with bitterness. "Elliot had discovered her infidelity and confronted her. She responded in the most destructive way possible, attacking what she knew he valued most, the family legacy and his personal honor. The revelation cast new light on Elliot's fears regarding public exposure. It wasn't simply modesty or reserve, it was a deep wound, a betrayal that had threatened everything he considered sacred." "How did he manage to overcome that?" asked Adelaide. Vivian returned to her seat, her expression softer now. With relentless determination, he worked tirelessly to rebuild both the business and his reputation. He enclosed himself emotionally, converting work into his only purpose. Until you arrived. A reflective silence filled the room as Adelaide assimilated this new information. "Now I understand his reaction to the article," she murmured. "It's not paranoia, it's trauma. He fears history will repeat itself." "Exactly," confirmed Vivian. "For Elliot, opening the estate to the public represented a calculated risk. But when references to his personal past began to appear, all those old fears resurged with overwhelming force." As night fell over the estate, Adelaide understood with greater clarity the internal battle Elliot was waging. It wasn't simply a question of privacy, but of deeply damaged trust. 3 days later, when Elliot's car finally appeared in the driveway, Adelaide awaited him on the porch. The evening light bathed the estate in golden hues, giving an almost dreamlike quality to the scene. When he descended from the vehicle, Adelaide immediately noticed the changes. The deep circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the evident fatigue in each movement. But beyond the physical exhaustion, she perceived something more disturbing. Her iron determination she recognized all too well, the same she had observed in the first days of their marriage, when he kept everyone at a distance. "Welcome home," she greeted him, approaching for an embrace he received stiffly. "Thank you," he responded mechanically. His gaze shifted to Adelaide's belly, visibly more rounded after a week of absence. For an instant, his expression softened. "How is he?" "Moving a lot," she responded with a smile, "especially at night. He seems to have inherited your habits of working late." A hint of a smile crossed Elliot's face, but disappeared quickly. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone resuming its seriousness. "There are important decisions we must make." In the office, Elliot unfolded documents on the desk with clinical efficiency. Contracts, confidentiality agreements, proposals for enhanced security for the estate. "I've consulted with the best lawyers specializing in privacy protection," he explained. "From now on, all visitors will have to sign these agreements before entering. I've also hired additional security personnel to monitor activities on the property." Adelaide reviewed the documents with growing concern. "This seems excessive. It will turn the experience of visiting the estate into something similar to entering a government facility." "It's necessary," he insisted. "We can't risk more incidents like the undercover journalist." Adelaide breathed deeply, seeking the best way to address the real issue. "Elliot, I spoke with Vivian during your absence." He tensed visibly. "About what?" "About Diana. About what really happened." A dense silence filled the room. Elliot moved away from the desk, turning his back to her as he approached the window. "She had no right," he murmured. "On the contrary," responded Adelaide softly. "She had every right, as did you. These are parts of your life that directly affect our present and future. And now what? He asked, not turning around. Do you understand why I must protect us this way? Adelaide approached, standing beside him before the window. I understand your fear. The trauma you lived through was real and devastating. But these measures don't protect us, Elliot. They enclose us. They rebuild the same walls that cost us so much to tear down. You don't understand, he insisted. I can't allow it to happen again. Not with you. Not with our child. Diana betrayed you, said Adelaide directly. It was terrible and left deep scars. But I'm not Diana, and this isn't the same scenario. The risks are the same, he responded. No, they aren't, affirmed Adelaide firmly, because we aren't the same. What we've built here, not just the business but our relationship, has more solid foundations. She took his hand, placing it gently on her belly where the baby had just moved. Feel that. It's real. It's our future. And that future can't flourish if we return to enclosing ourselves behind walls of distrust. Something in Elliot's face broke slightly as he felt the movement. The iron determination gave way momentarily to a raw vulnerability. I'm so afraid, Adelaide, he admitted in a whisper. Not of what they'll say or of public exposure. I'm afraid of failing, of not being enough to protect you both. It was the most sincere confession she had ever heard from him, the true core of his fears. The true failure, she responded, taking his face between her hands, would be to let fear dictate our decisions, to let the past eclipse our future. That night, as the estate sank into silence, Adelaide and Elliot remained on the porch under a starry sky, conversing as they hadn't in weeks. Revelations flowed between them, Elliot's deepest fears, Adelaide's yearnings for their nascent family, the hopes and concerns both had kept secret. I can't promise there won't be challenges, said Adelaide, as midnight approached, or that no one will ask uncomfortable questions again. But we can face them together, from strength and not from fear. Elliot nodded slowly, rigidity gradually leaving his shoulders. For years I believed isolation was safety. That maintaining distance was protection. He paused, looking toward the vineyards bathed in silver moonlight. But these months with you have shown me there's another type of strength, one that comes from sharing, not hiding. The path to healing wouldn't be exempt from setbacks. They both knew this. Patterns entrenched for years don't dissolve in one night of sincerity. But as they returned to their room, hands intertwined and steps synchronized, something fundamental had been restored between them, the confidence that together they could face both the ghosts of the past and the challenges of the future. Autumn arrived in Napa Valley, bringing gentle rains that revitalized the vineyards after the intense summer heat. Adelaide's 7th month of pregnancy coincided with the harvest season, transforming the estate into a hive of activity. Groups of workers methodically traversed the fields, harvesting the grapes that would soon transform into Oak Ridge's prized wines. After the revelations and sincere conversations of previous weeks, Elliot and Adelaide had found a new equilibrium. The extreme security measures he had proposed were significantly moderated. In their place, they implemented reasonable protocols that protected their privacy, without converting the estate into an impenetrable fortress. One morning, while Adelaide supervised the preparation of traditional winemaking workshops for visitors, she noticed a dull pain in her lower back. She initially ignored it, attributing it to accumulated fatigue and the growing weight of her pregnancy. However, when the discomfort persisted for hours, Martha intervened firmly. "You must rest, Mum," she insisted, guiding her to an armchair in the sitting room. "This is no time for stubbornness." "It's just fatigue," Adelaide tried to argue, although concern was beginning to filter into her voice. "The doctor was very clear in his last visit," reminded Martha. "At this stage of pregnancy, any sign should be taken seriously." Reluctantly, Adelaide agreed to retire to her room. As she climbed the stairs, another sharper pain forced her to stop, clutching the banister. This time the fear was immediate and visceral. It was too early for the baby to be born. She was just beginning the 7th month. In the bedroom, she lay down while Martha urgently called the doctor and sent an employee to search for Elliot, who was supervising the vineyards furthest from the property. The minutes stretched painfully as Adelaide fought against growing fear. What if she lost the baby? What if all Elliot's concerns about her excessive work rhythm had been justified? Guilt began to corrode her, mixing with a primal terror at the possibility of losing the creature that had become the center of her world. When the door abruptly opened, Adelaide expected to see Elliot. Instead, it was Vivian who rushed in, her usual composure replaced by genuine concern. "The doctor is on his way," she informed, approaching the bed. "And they've sent a message to Elliot. He'll be here soon." "It's too early," murmured Adelaide, tears accumulating in her eyes. "The baby can't be born now." Vivian took her hand with unexpected firmness. "Don't jump to conclusions. It could simply be your body asking you to slow down." "I've been imprudent," confessed Adelaide, giving voice to her fears. "Elliot constantly warned me, but I kept insisting on doing everything, showing I could." "Enough," interrupted Vivian with gentle authority. "Guilt doesn't help in these moments. Concentrate on breathing and staying calm." The doctor's arrival brought temporary relief. After a thorough examination, his diagnosis was reassuring. There were no signs of premature labor, just Braxton Hicks contractions intensified by dehydration and excessive activity. "Absolute rest for at least a week," he prescribed in a tone that admitted no discussion. "And afterward, very reduced activity until delivery. Stress and overexertion are your enemies now, Mrs. Blackwood." As the doctor was leaving, Elliot burst into the room, his face pale with worry and dirt still clinging to his clothes, evidence of the haste with which he had abandoned the vineyards. "What happened?" he asked, directing himself straight to Adelaide. The doctor explained the situation while Vivian discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. When the door closed behind them, Elliot approached the bed, taking Adelaide's hand in his. "I was so frightened," she confessed, tears finally releasing themselves. "I thought I might lose him because of my stubbornness." To her surprise, Elliot showed no reproach whatsoever. "You're fine," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "Both of you are fine. That's all that matters now." During the following days, Adelaide observed a subtle but significant transformation in Elliot. Instead of the anxious overprotection he had shown previously, he now exhibited an attentive calm. He completely reorganized his responsibilities to spend more time with her, but without suffocating her with excessive concern. In the mornings, he read aloud while she breakfasted in bed. In the afternoons, when the doctor permitted brief walks, he accompanied her through the gardens, sharing updates about the harvest and visitors, keeping her connected to the estate's life without pressuring her to become involved. One afternoon, while they rested on the porch observing the sunset over the vineyards, Adelaide expressed the uneasiness that had been gestating within her. "I feel useless," she confessed. "Everyone is working tirelessly while I'm here, simply waiting." Elliot looked at her intently. "You think carrying our child is simply waiting? It's the most important work anyone could do." The simplicity and sincerity of his response moved her deeply. "For years," he continued, taking her hand, "I measured the value of everything and everyone, including myself, by visible productivity. Tangible results, measurable successes. It was a devastating mistake." "What made you change perspective?" she asked. "You," he responded simply. "Seeing you create life while simultaneously revitalizing this estate taught me that the most important works are often invisible. They happen below the surface, like the roots of these century-old vines." As the week of absolute rest became 2, Adelaide experienced a different interior storm. For the first time in her adult life, she found herself forced to stop completely. With no tasks to complete, projects to supervise, or expectations to fulfill, this forced inactivity led her to a deep introspection that revealed uncomfortable truths about herself. One night, while Elliot read beside the bed, she vocalized a realization that had been slowly forming. "I think I understand something about myself that I've never seen clearly," she began, her voice soft in the dimness of the room. Elliot closed the book, giving her his full attention. "I've always defined my value by my utility," she continued. "Since childhood, I sought validation through my father's approval, who only noticed my achievements, never simply my existence. When I came here, I transferred that same dynamic. I constantly needed to demonstrate my value to justify my place in this house in your life." "You never needed to justify anything," he responded softly. "I know. Now," she said with a sad smile. "But that pattern was so deeply rooted in me that I wasn't even aware of it. It constantly pushed me toward exhaustion, trying to prove something no one was asking me to demonstrate." The silence that followed was full of mutual understanding. Two people recognizing similar patterns in themselves, He, measuring his value by his ability to protect and control, she, by her ability to serve and contribute tirelessly. "It's strange," reflected Elliot. "We began this marriage as complete strangers, united by practical circumstances. And now we know each other better than anyone has ever known us," she completed. "Including ourselves," he added. That night, as the full moon illuminated the vineyards, creating an almost magical landscape, both felt that something fundamental had healed between them. The interior storm each had faced, he with his deep fears of abandonment and failure, she with her compulsive need for validation through service, was beginning to subside, leaving in its place a renewed clarity. The baby moved strongly under their intertwined hands on Adelaide's belly, as if affirming this new understanding. In the silence of the room, surrounded by the century-old walls that had witnessed so many stories of the Blackwood family, both felt the certainty that they were writing a fundamentally new chapter, not a repetition of old patterns, but a genuinely original story. With the 8th month of pregnancy, activity at Oak Ridge Estate completely reorganized around Adelaide's well-being. Vivian, to everyone's surprise, assumed supervision of the culinary workshops and guided tours, revealing an unexpected talent for hospitality that contrasted with her usual reserve. Elliot divided his time between business administration and attentive care of Adelaide, maintaining a delicate balance between protection and the personal space she needed. One December morning, while breakfasting on the covered porch they had adapted so Adelaide could enjoy fresh air, even on cooler days, Elliot handed her an official-looking envelope. "What is this?" she asked, curious at his enigmatic expression. "Open it," he responded simply. Inside she found legal documents with the letterhead of a San Francisco notary. Upon examining them more closely, Adelaide caught her breath. They were the estate's property papers, modified to include her name alongside Elliot's as absolute co-owner. "I don't understand," she murmured, looking up at him. "It's very simple," responded Elliot. "This estate is no longer just mine. It's ours, legally and in every sense." The magnitude of the gesture overwhelmed her. For a family like the Blackwoods, where property had passed strictly from father to firstborn son for generations, this act represented a radical break with centuries-old traditions. "Why now?" she asked, genuinely moved. Elliot sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Because I want our child to be born in a house where both parents are equal in all aspects, where old hierarchies have been replaced by mutual respect." He paused, seeking the precise words. "And because you saved this place, Adelaide, not just the business but its essence. You deserve to be recognized for what you truly are, not a wife who arrived through a convenient arrangement, but a true guardian of Oak Ridge." Tears came to Adelaide's eyes, not just for the gesture itself but for what it symbolized, the complete transformation of their relationship, from a practical contract to an alliance based on genuine love and respect. "Thank you," she murmured, knowing the words were insufficient to express the depth of her emotion. He smiled, a smile that illuminated his eyes in a way Adelaide had rarely seen. "Don't thank me for doing what's right, even if belatedly." The following days brought another surprise, the arrival of Harrison, Adelaide's father, for an extended visit before the birth. When the taxi stopped in front of the estate, Adelaide waited on the porch, her heart racing at the prospect of this encounter. The figure who descended from the vehicle seemed to have aged decades since she had last seen him on her wedding day. Harrison Winters, once a robust and energetic man, now appeared diminished, his face furrowed by lines of worry and fatigue. However, when he saw his daughter, a genuine smile transformed his features. "My girl," he murmured, embracing her awkwardly, limited by the voluminous belly that came between them. "Look at you. You're radiant." "I've missed you, Dad," she responded, surprised by the sincerity of her own words. Their relationship had always been complex. Harrison, widowed since Adelaide was 5, had raised her with a mixture of pragmatic love and traditional expectations. He had never been a demonstrative man, and his approvals came more in the form of absence of criticism than explicit praise. Elliot received his father-in-law with sincere cordiality, surprising Adelaide with his warmth toward a man with whom he had barely interacted during the marriage preparations. "Welcome to our home, Harrison," he said, firmly shaking his hand. We're happy to have you with us for this special moment. Harrison's presence at the estate brought unexpected dynamics. During the first shared meals, Adelaide observed with fascination how her father and Elliot interacted. There was evident mutual respect, but also a natural caution, two men accustomed to leading, evaluating each other. One afternoon, while Elliot showed Harrison the renovated facilities for wine tourism, Adelaide observed them from a distance. The conversation between them, initially formal, gradually transformed into a more animated exchange. Harrison's knowledge of traditional wine production perfectly complemented Elliot's innovative vision for the business. "Your father is a man of deep knowledge," commented Elliot that night, as they prepared for bed. "I better understand where your business acumen comes from." Adelaide smiled, remembering how she had absorbed knowledge listening to her father's conversations with other producers, even when he considered these topics not appropriate for a young lady. "He never allowed me to participate directly in the business," she responded, "but I learned by observing, listening when he didn't notice." "A pity," commented Elliot. "He could have benefited enormously from your intelligence." The observation, made without pretension, touched a sensitive point. For years, Adelaide had yearned for recognition from her father, some indication that he saw value in her ideas, not just in her filial obedience. The opportunity for a long-postponed conversation came unexpectedly 2 days later. While Elliot attended to matters in town, Adelaide found her father contemplating the vineyards from the porch, a cup of wine in his hand and a melancholic expression on his face. "They're magnificent," she commented, approaching slowly. "Some are over 200 years old," Harrison nodded. "Vines that have seen generations pass. There's wisdom in that permanence." Something in his tone, a vulnerability he rarely showed, encouraged Adelaide to venture into emotional territory. "Do you regret having sent me here?" she asked directly. Her father looked at her, surprised by the frankness of the question. "Sent you? I never saw it that way. I believed I was securing your future." "I know," she responded softly. "But have you ever wondered what might have happened if you had allowed me to help you with our family business? If you had considered my ideas instead of arranging an advantageous marriage?" Harrison set his cup on the table, fully facing his daughter. In his eyes, Adelaide saw something she had never perceived before: remorse. "You were always too intelligent for the world I knew," he finally confessed. "Since childhood you saw solutions where I only saw problems. It frightened me. I feared that brilliant mind would be wasted in our small corner of the world." "You could have taught me the business," she insisted. "We would have found solutions together." "Parents make mistakes, Adelaide," he responded with a broken voice, "especially when we love so intensely that fear clouds our judgment. I wanted you safe, prosperous, in a place where your potential could flourish. And it never occurred to you to ask what I wanted?" Tears came to her eyes, long-contained emotions finally finding their course. Harrison stood, approaching to take her hands in his, an intimate gesture unusual between them. "When I lost your mother, I felt completely lost. My only thought was to protect you at all costs, even from my own mistakes, perhaps especially from those." He paused, his eyes moistening. "Seeing you now, the extraordinary woman you've become, makes me wonder how much of that growth I would have witnessed if I had had the courage to let you help me instead of trying to save you." The raw honesty of his confession completely disarmed Adelaide. For the first time she saw her father not as the unquestionable authority figure of her childhood, but as a vulnerable man who had done the best he could with the limited emotional tools he possessed. "I forgive you," she said simply, the words arising from a place of newly discovered understanding. "And I hope you can forgive yourself." The embrace that followed was awkward due to her advanced pregnancy, but genuine in a way they had never before experienced. When they separated, something fundamental had changed between them. An invisible barrier had dissolved, allowing the beginning of an adult relationship based not on filial obedience, but on mutual respect. That night, as Elliot and Harrison conversed animatedly about expansion plans for wine production, Adelaide observed with amazement how two apparently separate chapters of her life interwove harmoniously. The past and present no longer seemed in conflict, but complementary parts of a broader story. When she came to bed that night, she found Elliot awake, waiting for her with a thoughtful expression. "Your father told me about your conversation," he commented, as she awkwardly accommodated herself due to her advanced pregnancy. Everything? She asked, surprised by this show of emotional openness from her habitually reserved father. Enough to make me reflect on my own fears regarding our child, he responded, placing a hand on her belly. I wonder how many mistakes I'll make in my attempt to protect him, how many times my love will express itself awkwardly or insufficiently. The vulnerability in his confession deeply moved Adelaide. I suppose it's inevitable, she responded softly. Paternal love seems to come with an inherent dose of fear and doubt. What consoles me, continued Elliot, is knowing I won't be alone in those moments, that you'll be there to correct me when my protection becomes excessive or my fears cloud my judgment. As you will be for me, she added, intertwining her fingers with his. As the night advanced, Adelaide reflected on the parallel transformations they had both experienced. The solitary and controlling businessman had learned the value of vulnerability and trust. The obedient young wife had discovered her own strength and intrinsic worth. Together, they had created a space where both could be simultaneously strong and vulnerable, leaders and learners. The baby moved vigorously under their intertwined hands, as if perceiving the depth of the moment. In a few weeks, a new life would join this transformation story, not as an epilogue, but as the beginning of a new chapter in the renewed Oakridge estate. Christmas arrived at Oakridge estate with a splendor it hadn't known in decades. Under Adelaide's enthusiastic direction, every corner of the old house was adorned with garlands of evergreen intertwined with dried flowers and citrus, a traditional California decoration she remembered from her childhood. The aroma of cinnamon, clove, and orange permeated the air, mingling with the unmistakable perfume of freshly baked bread that constantly emanated from the kitchen. To everyone's surprise, Vivian revealed an unsuspected talent for holiday baking. Her traditional cookies and pastries, elaborated following an almost forgotten family recipe she had rescued from an old notebook of her grandmother's, quickly became the centerpiece of afternoon teas shared by the fireside. I never imagined I would come to see this, commented Harrison one afternoon, as he observed Elliot and Vivian animatedly discussing the precise amount of spice that should go into the traditional mulled wine. Your husband seems a different man from the one I met on your wedding day. Adelaide, reclined in an armchair with her hands resting on her prominent belly, smiled. We've both changed. This place has that effect on people. Christmas Eve brought an unexpected surprise. While they finished dinner in the main dining room, decorated with candles and pine branches, the sound of guitars and banjos began to filter in from the courtyard. Elliot, with a complicit smile, helped Adelaide to rise. There's something I prepared for you, he explained, guiding her toward the exterior. There, under the winter starry sky, a group of local folk musicians had prepared an improvised stage. The lights from antique lanterns illuminated the stone courtyard, creating a magical ambience against the estate's walls. You always mentioned how much you love traditional American folk music, said Elliot. I thought it would be an appropriate gift. Emotion overwhelmed Adelaide as the musicians began to interpret old ballads and folk songs, the deep songs that had always moved her. The authentic voice of the lead singer seemed to express the full range of human emotions: passion, pain, joy, yearning. Seated with her family, because that's what they were now, a true family united by something much deeper than convenience or duty, Adelaide felt a wave of gratitude so intense it momentarily cut her breath. The young woman who had arrived at this house 8 months ago, nervous and resigned to a marriage of convenience, would never have imagined the fullness she would find between these ancient walls. When the musicians interpreted a lullaby, an obviously thoughtful choice for the future mother, tears freely rolled down her cheeks. Elliot delicately dried them with his thumb, his own face reflecting contained emotion. Thank you, she whispered, for all of this. For allowing yourself to change. For letting us grow together. He gently kissed her hand. Thank you for having the patience and courage to tear down my walls, one by one. The celebration continued well into the night. Even Vivian, habitually reserved, was encouraged to take a few dance steps when the musicians performed a lively bluegrass tune, revealing a natural grace that drew spontaneous applause from all present. Harrison, visibly moved seeing his daughter so happy and respected, approached Elliot at one point in the evening. I must confess something to you, he said quietly. When we arranged this marriage, my concern was securing Adelaide's future in the face of our financial problems. I never imagined she would find true happiness. Elliot nodded understandingly. I also didn't expect more than a convenient arrangement. Life has surprising ways of challenging our most limited expectations. The exchange, though brief, sealed a genuine complicity between the two men. Both had come to understand that Adelaide's happiness was a point of union deeper than any marital contract. The early hours of Christmas Day, while the house slept after the celebrations, Adelaide awoke with an unmistakable sensation. The first contractions, gentle but regular, announced that the baby had decided that Christmas would be his moment of arrival in the world. "Elliot," she called softly, touching her husband's shoulder. He awoke immediately, his senses sharpened by the expectation of these last weeks. "Is it time?" She nodded, surprisingly serene. "I think our child has chosen a significant day to be born." With calm efficiency, Elliot set in motion the plan they had meticulously elaborated. Martha was awakened to prepare what was necessary, while he called the doctor, who had agreed to spend the holidays in the nearby town precisely to be available when the moment came. Vivian and Harrison, alerted to the events, took charge of coordinating the final preparations, while Elliot remained at Adelaide's side, holding her hand through the contractions that gradually increased in intensity. "I'm afraid," she confessed during a moment of calm between contractions. "Not of the pain, but of the immensity of what's coming, of being a mother, of having in my hands a life so fragile and precious." "I'm terrified too," he admitted, with an honesty that months ago would have been unthinkable. "But if there's something I've learned with you, it's that shared fears become more manageable. We're not alone in this." Labor progressed with the deliberate slowness of natural processes. The doctor, upon arrival, confirmed that everything was progressing normally, although they would probably have several hours ahead. The bedroom transformed into an intimate and almost sacred space, illuminated by the soft light of dawn beginning to filter through the curtains. As the contractions intensified, Adelaide found strength in the deep roots she had developed in this land that was initially alien to her. Each breath, each moment between pains, connected her more deeply with the generations of women who had given birth between these same century-old walls. "The oldest vines of the estate have witnessed more than 10 generations of Blackwood births," commented Elliot, as if he had caught the thread of her thoughts. "There's something comforting in that continuity, don't you think?" She nodded, understanding perfectly. "But there's also beauty in new beginnings, in traditions we transform and adapt." The hours passed in a strange suspension of normal time. Pain came in waves that Adelaide faced with silent determination, clutching Elliot's hand like an anchor amid the storm. He remained unshakable at her side, whispering words of encouragement, drying her brow, being the constant presence he had promised to be. When the definitive moment approached, the room seemed charged with an almost palpable energy. The doctor, Martha, and a midwife from town coordinated their efforts with the precision of those who know the ancestral choreography of birth. "I can see the head now," announced the doctor. "One more push, Adelaide." With a final push that seemed to gather all her remaining strength, Adelaide felt the life she had carried within finally emerging into the world. The vigorous cry that followed was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "A boy," announced the doctor with a smile, placing the newborn on Adelaide's chest. "A beautiful and healthy boy." The little one, his face reddened by effort and a tuft of dark hair stuck to his tiny head, calmed immediately upon feeling contact with his mother. His eyes, not yet focused but intensely alive, seemed to briefly connect with Adelaide's in a primordial recognition. "He's perfect," murmured Elliot, his voice broken with emotion. His fingers delicately caressed the diminutive cheek with an almost fearful reverence. "He has your eyes," observed Adelaide, though it was too early to really determine the resemblance. "And your determination, clearly," he responded with a smile. "Look how he grips my finger." The external world seemed to vanish as the new family got to know each other in these precious first moments. The room, previously filled with the intensity of childbirth, now overflowed with an almost tangible peace, as if time itself had decided to slow down to honor the sacredness of the moment. When they finally allowed Vivian and Harrison to briefly enter to meet the newborn, tears flowed freely. Vivian, always contained, made no effort to hide her emotion as she held her nephew for the first time. "What will his name be?" she asked, gently rocking the baby. Adelaide and Elliot exchanged a complicit look. They had discussed names for months, But the final decision had been made just a few weeks ago. "Oliver," responded Adelaide. "Oliver Blackwood Winters." The name, simple but deeply meaningful, seemed to resonate perfectly in the room. Oliver, a symbol of peace and new beginnings, representing the transformation of a marriage of convenience into a union of true love, the emotion that had allowed two wounded people to open themselves again to vulnerability and trust. As the first Christmas morning lazily advanced over the vineyards, bathing the estate in golden light, little Oliver slept peacefully between his parents. In his tiny face, Adelaide could see the future unfolding with infinite possibilities. A boy born not of duty but of love, not of family expectations, but of the conscious choice of two people who had learned that the fullest life emerges when we allow our hearts to guide our steps. "He has deep roots," commented Elliot, observing his son with adoration. "Generations of history in this land." "And he will have strong wings," added Adelaide, "to fly as high as he wishes." In the century-old vineyard, the branches swayed gently with the winter breeze, as if the ancient vines were whispering blessings to the new life that had come to renew once more the eternal promise of Oakridge Estate. Spring arrived in Napa Valley with an explosion of colors and aromas. The fields surrounding Oakridge Estate covered themselves with wildflowers and golden poppies, creating a spectacular contrast with the deep green of the vineyards. For Adelaide, this first spring as a mother brought with it a new way of perceiving the world, as if each sense had sharpened to appreciate beauties that before passed unnoticed. Little Oliver, now 4 months old, was growing with the vigor and determination his name suggested. His eyes, initially the cloudy blue of all newborns, had cleared to show the same intense amber as his father, but with the vivacity and curiosity that characterized Adelaide. The combination proved irresistible to all the estate's inhabitants, including Vivian, who had indefinitely postponed her return to Los Angeles to be near her nephew. One particularly sunny morning, while Adelaide nursed Oliver on the porch overlooking the gardens, Elliot approached with an envelope in hand and a thoughtful expression. "This has arrived," he announced, handing her the letter. "From the American Association of Wine Tourism and Gastronomy." Adelaide immediately recognized the logo. It was one of the most prestigious organizations in the sector, known for its demanding standards of quality and authenticity. "What does it say?" she asked, adjusting Oliver to take the envelope with her free hand. "I haven't opened it yet," responded Elliot, sitting beside them. "I wanted us to read it together." This small gesture, the desire to share both good and bad news, was one of the many subtle but significant changes that had transformed their relationship during the last year. Adelaide smiled, appreciating the consideration. Carefully, Elliot opened the envelope and began to read aloud. As he advanced in the reading, his expression transformed from concentration to surprise and finally to evident pride. "We've been selected as finalists for the Best Wine Tourism Experience of the Year award," he finally announced, looking up from the paper. "The ceremony will be in New York next month." "This is extraordinary," exclaimed Adelaide, the emotion causing Oliver to momentarily detach from her breast. "Sorry, little one," she murmured, helping him resume feeding. "There's more," continued Elliot. "They specifically mention our approach of integrating ancient traditions with modern sustainable practices. And," he paused, his voice charging with emotion, "they particularly highlight the culinary workshops you designed, describing them as an authentic window to the soul of California wine country." The external validation of what they had built together, especially the recognition of Adelaide's specific contributions, had a profound meaning for both. It wasn't simply a potential award, it was confirmation that their shared vision had resonated far beyond the limits of their property. "We should go," said Elliot decisively. "Both of us. It's our joint achievement." Adelaide looked at the baby in her arms. "And Oliver? He's barely 4 months old." "He'll come with us, of course," he responded, as if it were the most evident solution. "He's a fundamental part of this story. Without him, without what his arrival meant for us, perhaps we would never have found the clarity to create something so authentic." The simplicity with which Elliot integrated his fatherhood into all aspects of his life was another notable transformation. The man who months ago had feared any vulnerability now openly embraced the changes that little Oliver had brought to their lives. The news spread quickly through the estate, generating a wave of celebration among the staff. Martha prepared a special cake for afternoon tea, while Morris opened bottles of sparkling wine he had reserved for special occasions. The shared joy reflected how Oakridge Estate had transformed not just into a successful business, but into a community united by common purposes. That afternoon, while the last rays of sun tinted the vineyard's gold, Elliot and Adelaide walked slowly among the century-old vines, with Oliver sleeping in the baby carrier Elliot wore on his chest. It was a walk they had converted into a daily ritual, a moment to reconnect after the occupations of the day. "Do you remember the first time we walked together through these vineyards?" asked Adelaide, taking Elliot's hand as they advanced along the familiar path. He smiled, the memory clearly present in his mind. "You were as nervous as I was, though you dissimulated admirably." "I was trying to memorize the names of all the grape varieties to impress you," she confessed with a soft laugh. "As if that could justify my presence here. And I was trying to maintain a professional distance," he responded, "while secretly marveling at your knowledge and sensitivity toward these vines." They stopped beside a particularly ancient grapevine, its twisted trunk telling stories of centuries of persistence. Elliot caressed the rough bark with reverence, a gesture Adelaide had observed countless times. "My grandfather taught me that the oldest vines are like wise elders," he commented. "They don't give as much fruit as the young ones, but what they produce has an incomparable depth of flavor. Time, he used to say, is the secret ingredient that no modern technology can replicate." "And he was right," responded Adelaide, "as you were also right to insist on maintaining traditional production methods, even when it seemed economically unviable." Elliot looked at the little one sleeping peacefully against his chest. "And you were right to insist we could honor that tradition while opening ourselves to new possibilities." "I suppose we both had part of the truth," reflected Adelaide, "like new wine in old bottles. Tradition provides the structure, but it needs new energies to continue enriching." The metaphor seemed to resonate deeply with Elliot. "It's exactly what you brought to this estate," he said with emotional voice. "Renewed richness in century-old structures." As they returned to the house where Vivian and Harrison were preparing dinner, Adelaide felt a fullness that transcended the emotion for the recognition received. It was the deep satisfaction of having found her place in the world, not by obligation or circumstance, but by authentic belonging. The preparations for the trip to New York occupied the following weeks. To everyone's surprise, Vivian revealed an unsuspected talent for logistics, meticulously organizing every detail to ensure that traveling with such a young baby would be as comfortable as possible. "I never imagined I'd see you so involved in planning a family trip," commented Elliot one afternoon, observing his sister meticulously reviewing lists of essential items for Oliver. Vivian gave him a look that mixed irony and affection. "And I never imagined seeing you changing diapers with such naturalness, but here we are." Vivian's transformation had perhaps been less evident, but equally profound. The distant and defensive woman, who had arrived at the estate with barely disguised skepticism, had converted into a constant presence of practical support and discreet affection. The night before their departure for New York, after Oliver finally fell asleep following his nighttime ritual, Adelaide found Elliot on the porch, contemplating the stars with a reflective expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him. "About transformations," he responded, intertwining his fingers with hers. "About how you arrived here as a stranger and now are the very heart of this place." "It's curious," she reflected. "When I came, I was resigned to a marriage of convenience. My only hope was to find some small space to be myself within the limits of the agreement, and I was convinced I could keep the walls intact," he added. "Fulfill my family obligations without risking my heart again." The silence that followed was full of shared appreciation for the path traveled. From that first night, when they contemplated each other as strangers united by convenience, to this moment of genuine complicity under the Napa Valley stars, "It's as if destiny knew better than we did what we needed," murmured Adelaide. "Perhaps," responded Elliot, "or perhaps we simply had the courage to tear down piece by piece the walls that separated us." They remained like this, hands intertwined and gazes shared, while the estate slept peacefully around them. The greenhouse, now completely restored, glowed faintly under the moonlight. The vineyards, which had witnessed generations of the Blackwood family, seemed to stand silent guard over them, like satisfied witnesses of this transformation story. "Tomorrow we begin a new chapter," said Elliot finally. "We'll show the world what we've created together." "What we've created goes far beyond a successful business," responded Adelaide, her hand instinctively moving toward the room where Oliver slept. "We've built a home where before there was just a house, a place where ancient roots and new branches grow in harmony." That night, while preparing the last belongings for the trip, Adelaide found among her things the dress she had worn on her wedding day. She contemplated it for a moment, remembering the young woman who had worn it with resignation and nervousness. That Adelaide now seemed a stranger, a preliminary sketch of the woman she had become. In an impulse, she carefully folded the dress and stored it in her suitcase. Perhaps in New York, while celebrating their shared achievement, she would find the right moment to propose to Elliot something she had been considering. To renew their vows, this time not as a contract between strangers, but as a celebration of the genuine love that had unexpectedly blossomed among the century-old vineyards. The ceremony in New York exceeded all their expectations. The prestigious theater where the gala was held was decorated with elements that honored the culinary traditions from all over America. When the presenter announced that the award for Best Wine Tourism Experience was granted to Oak Ridge Estate, the ovation was immediate and enthusiastic. Adelaide, with Oliver sleeping peacefully in her arms, and Elliot ascended the stage together. The image they projected, a young family that had transformed a century-old tradition into an innovative project without losing its essence, perfectly captured the spirit of the award. "This recognition belongs to generations of hands that have cared for these vineyards," began Elliot in his acceptance speech, "to those who came before us and planted seeds whose fruits they would not live to see. But above all," he continued, looking directly at Adelaide, "it belongs to the one who had the vision and courage to insist that honoring tradition doesn't mean remaining static, but evolving with wisdom." Elliot's words, pronounced with genuine emotion before a national audience, represented the perfect culmination of his transformation. The man who had feared showing any vulnerability now openly expressed his admiration and gratitude without reservations or defenses. When they returned to their seats amid applause, Adelaide leaned to whisper in his ear. "I brought my wedding dress," she said softly. "I was thinking of proposing that we renew our vows here in New York, but now I realize it's not necessary. Each day, with each shared decision, with each look, we are already reaffirming what we've built." Elliot looked at her with an intensity that still, after so many months together, made her heart accelerate. "You're right," he responded. "We don't need ceremonies to validate what we already know. Although," he added with a smile, "I would never oppose an excuse to see you again in that dress." That night, from the balcony of their hotel overlooking Central Park, they contemplated together the lights of New York reflected in the park's lakes. Oliver slept peacefully in the adjoining room, temporarily watched by a professional nanny the hotel had provided, so they could enjoy a few hours alone. "Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you?" asked Elliot, embracing her from behind as they observed the illuminated city. "That I was too young and inexperienced to be a suitable wife," she suggested with humor. "That you had eyes impossible to read," he responded. "There was such depth in them, so many thoughts I couldn't decipher. It intimidated me, though I would never have admitted it then. And I thought you were exactly as they described you. Cold, calculating, impenetrable," she confessed. "I never imagined the warm currents that flowed beneath that surface." She turned to look at him, silently thanking every circumstance, every decision, even the painful ones, that had led them to this precise moment. "We're like the wine we produce," she reflected. "It required pressure, sometimes painful, to extract the best from us." When they returned to the estate a week later, they were received with an improvised celebration organized by the staff and inhabitants of the nearby town. The courtyard filled with music, flowers, and the aroma of traditional dishes prepared to honor the national recognition they had received. Amid the festivities, while Oliver passed from arm to arm, adored by all as the most visible symbol of the estate's rebirth, Adelaide momentarily withdrew to the greenhouse. She needed an instant of quietude to assimilate the magnitude of all they had lived. Among the plants she had rescued and the new ones she had introduced, she found a balance that perfectly reflected her philosophy, honoring the old while embracing new possibilities. The seeds she had planted months ago now vigorously flourished, transforming what once was an abandoned space into a sanctuary of life and beauty. Elliot found her there, contemplating the flowers with a serene expression. "I was looking for you," he said, approaching. "They're about to serve the special dessert Martha prepared in your honor." "I just needed a moment," she responded, turning to receive him, "to give thanks, to assimilate everything that's happened." He understood her perfectly. For him, too, these moments of silent contemplation had become essential. Together, they had learned that shared silence could be as intimate as the deepest words. "Yesterday, I received a letter from a winemaker in Sonoma," commented Elliot after a few moments. "He wants to visit the estate to learn our model of integration between tradition and experiential tourism. It seems our approach is inspiring others." Adelaide smiled, understanding the broader significance of this news. What they had built together was beginning to extend its influence beyond their own limits, like the roots of the vines that intertwine underground, connecting apparently separate plants. "It's like planting an entire forest when you only intended to save one tree," she reflected. As they returned to the courtyard where the celebration continued, Adelaide observed with new clarity the complete transformation of her reality. The estate, which she had initially perceived as an elegant prison where she would fulfill a marital duty, had converted into the epicenter of a full and meaningful life, radiating possibilities in ever-widening circles. The new wine shone with renewed light in the old bottles of Oak Ridge Estate, illuminating not only their own path, but also that of those fortunate enough to cross paths with this family that had learned that the most valuable tradition is one that knows how to evolve without losing its essence. 2 years later, on a golden spring afternoon, Oak Ridge Estate overflowed with activity. The gardens, now completely transformed under Adelaide's careful supervision, exploded with colors and aromas that attracted visitors from all over the country. The old barn, converted into an interpretation center about the history of wine in California, daily welcomed groups of students and tourists fascinated by the way the Blackwood family had managed to interweave past and present. In the central courtyard, under the same ancient oak that had witnessed generations of family stories, Oliver, now a 2.5-year-old boy with inexhaustible energy, chased butterflies with the focused determination he had inherited from both parents. His dark curls, identical to Adelaide's, shone under the California sun while his crystalline laughter filled the air. "Look, Daddy!" he exclaimed every few minutes, pointing to some fascinating discovery with the pure wonder that only children possess. Elliot, seated beside Adelaide on an ancient stone bench, observed his son with an expression that combined pride and amazement. At 42, his face showed new lines of expression, but they were mainly marks of laughter and wonder, not of worry as before. "Sometimes I wonder who has learned more in these years," he commented, intertwining his fingers with Adelaide's. "Whether we from him or he from us." "I think it's been mutual learning," responded Adelaide, resting her head on Elliot's shoulder as they contemplated their son. "He has taught us to see the world with new eyes, and we try to show him how to honor roots while cultivating strong wings." The metaphor, which had become a family mantra since Oliver's birth, resonated especially on this particular day. It was the anniversary of her arrival at the estate, a date they had decided to celebrate annually, not as commemoration of an arranged marriage, but as celebration of the beginning of a transformative journey. Oak Ridge Estate had become a national reference for sustainable wine tourism. The model that Adelaide had proposed that decisive night, when Elliot was contemplating selling ancestral lands to keep the business afloat, was now studied in business schools as an example of innovation, respectful of tradition. Revenue had multiplied beyond initial expectations, allowing them not only to secure the property's future, but also to implement support programs for small producers in the region. "I have a surprise for you," announced Elliot, taking an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. "I wanted to wait for the right moment to show you." Adelaide took the envelope with curiosity. Inside, she found plans for a new construction in the eastern part of the property, next to the lavender fields she had introduced the previous year. "A school?" she asked, examining the designs with growing emotion. "A training center," clarified Elliot, "for women from the region who want to learn wine tourism management and artisanal production, with full scholarships for those who can't afford tuition." The idea connected perfectly with a concern Adelaide had expressed on numerous occasions: the lack of educational opportunities for rural women interested in developing sustainable businesses based on local traditions. "It's perfect," she murmured, emotion making her voice barely audible. "When construction will begin next month," he responded. "If everything goes according to plan, it will open its doors by next fall, and," he added with a smile, "I would like you to be the director of the educational program." Adelaide looked at him with eyes bright with contained tears. "Me? But I don't have formal academic training in administration or—" "You have something much more valuable," he interrupted gently. "Lived experience, vision, the ability to see potential where others only see limitations. I can't imagine anyone better qualified." At that moment, Oliver ran toward them, his small hands carefully holding a wildflower he had found among the stones in the courtyard. "For you, Mommy," he announced solemnly, offering the flower with the ceremonial seriousness that only children can imbue simple gestures with. Adelaide accepted the gift with equal solemnity, conscious of the privilege of witnessing the spontaneous generosity of a heart not yet conditioned by the complexities of the adult world. "Thank you, my love," she responded, kissing her son's forehead. "It's the most beautiful flower I've ever received." Satisfied with the response, Oliver returned to his explorations, now concentrated on following the path of a small beetle among the ancient stones. "He's like you," commented Elliot, observing his son. "He finds beauty in what others overlook. That quality transformed this estate, transformed my life." The confession, simple but profound, touched Adelaide deeply. She knew that for a man like Elliot, raised in traditions of masculine stoicism and impenetrable strength, expressing vulnerability continued to be an act of considerable courage. "We've transformed each other," she responded, "and we continue doing so each day." In the distance, the sound of vehicles approaching announced the arrival of guests for the celebration they had planned. It wouldn't be an ostentatious party, but an intimate gathering with people who had been a significant part of their shared story. Harrison, who now lived permanently in a small but comfortable house on the property, was the first to appear in the courtyard, accompanied by Vivian. The two unlikely allies at the beginning had developed a friendship based on their shared love for Oliver and their mutual interest in classical American literature, discovered during long afternoons of convalescence after Vivian's accident. "Grandpa!" exclaimed Oliver, running toward Harrison with extended arms. The man, whose face completely transformed in the presence of his grandson, lifted him in an embrace that defied his age and the ailments typical of his 70 years. Martha appeared at the door connecting to the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. "The food will be ready in an hour," she announced, "and Morris has brought up from the cellar the special wines we reserved for today." Gradually the courtyard filled with voices and laughter. The estate's closest collaborators, some neighbors from town who had become true friends, even a couple of regular clients who had transcended the commercial relationship to form part of the Blackwoods' intimate circle. Amid the celebration, Adelaide found herself momentarily alone beside the central fountain. Contemplating the water that constantly flowed, renewing itself without losing its essence, she reflected on the profound meaning of these 3 years that had passed since her arrival at Oakridge. She had come as a stranger, a young woman resigned to a marriage of convenience out of filial duty. She had found herself with an equally resigned man, enclosed behind emotional walls built by pain and distrust. And yet from this unpromising beginning had blossomed something authentic and transformative. "You're very thoughtful," commented Vivian, approaching with 2 glasses of wine. She offered one to Adelaide and positioned herself beside her, both now contemplating the constant flow of water. "I was remembering how everything began," responded Adelaide, accepting the glass with a grateful smile. "How you knew Elliot and me then and how you see us now." Vivian nodded, understanding perfectly. "When I met you, I was convinced you were another opportunist taking advantage of my brother's vulnerability," she confessed, with the direct frankness that characterized her. "I was determined to protect him, even from himself if necessary." "I know," responded Adelaide without resentment. "I also saw you as an obstacle, an inflexible guardian of the past." Both women exchanged a complicit look, appreciating the irony of how those initial perceptions had transformed into a mutual respect that bordered on genuine affection. "Perhaps we all need to be challenged in our certainties," reflected Vivian. "I was so sure I knew my brother, knew what was best for him." She paused, observing Elliot, who at that moment was listening with genuine attention to a story Harrison was relating. I had never seen him like this, so present, so at peace with himself. He would say the same about you, responded Adelaide softly. How your accident opened a door for you to show aspects of yourself you had kept hidden for years. Vivian smiled, recognizing the truth in these words. I suppose the Blackwoods share that tendency to hide behind facades of competence and control, she admitted. We need extraordinary circumstances to show our true natures. The sound of Oliver's laughter attracted the attention of both. The boy had discovered, to the delight of all present, that he could create shadows with his hands against the white wall, illuminated by the setting sun. He won't have to learn that, commented Vivian, observing her nephew. To hide, I mean. He's growing up in an environment where authenticity is valued, where emotions aren't considered weaknesses. That is perhaps our most important achievement, responded Adelaide, more than the awards or the business success. As the sun began to descend behind the vineyards, bathing the estate in a golden light that seemed to bless every corner, Elliot called the attention of those present, raising his glass in a toast. 3 years ago, he began, his voice clear in the now silent courtyard, this estate was losing its essence. The vines continued producing, the grapes continued transforming into wine, but something fundamental was fading. He paused, seeking Adelaide with his gaze. The soul of Oakridge was withering like a plant deprived of light and water. Then someone arrived who knew how to see beyond appearances, who recognized the dormant potential, not just in these lands, but in the people who inhabit them. Adelaide felt the warmth of gazes converging on her, but Elliot's eyes were the only ones she really saw. Some might say our marriage began as a practical arrangement, he continued, but I believe it was the beginning of something that was destined to be, though neither of us knew it then. He raised his glass a little higher. To Adelaide, who brought new wine to old bottles, who taught us that honoring the past doesn't mean being trapped in it. The glasses rose in unison, and the crystalline sound of the toasts mingled with the soft breeze that swayed the leaves of the century-old vines. As the celebration continued, Adelaide found herself again beside Elliot, observing their small extended family. Oliver now seated on Vivian's lap, while Harrison showed them both a hand game he remembered from his own childhood. Martha, supervising the serving of the food with her usual loving efficiency, friends and collaborators sharing stories and laughter. Do you know what I thought the first night I spent in this estate? She asked Elliot in a low voice, just for his ears. That you had made a terrible mistake, he suggested with a smile. That this place had secrets to tell, she responded. That beneath the surface of formality and tradition, there were stories waiting to be discovered. I felt the estate itself was inviting me to listen. Elliot nodded, understanding perfectly. And you listened, he said simply, when no one else did. In that moment, as if sensing the emotional intensity of the exchange between his parents, Oliver rose from Vivian's lap and ran to them. Without words, he simply positioned himself between them, taking a hand of each. The gesture, as simple as it was profound, perfectly symbolized what they had built together, a bridge between past and future, a continuity that honored roots while cultivating new possibilities. As the sun completely disappeared behind the vineyards, stars began to appear in the California sky. The same stars that had witnessed generations of stories in this land now contemplated something new, a family that had learned that true love isn't the instantaneous feeling of fairy tales, but a daily choice to care for, protect, and celebrate the person they had chosen as life companion. In the century-old vineyard, where everything had begun, and where the essence of Oakridge Estate persisted through the centuries, a gentle night breeze swayed the leaves, creating a whisper that sounded almost like a blessing for this story that would continue to be written day by day between walls of silence that now overflowed with words of love finally pronounced. The decisions we make out of duty are often those that most profoundly transform our destiny, Elliot had thought that first night, observing the unknown young woman destiny had placed in his path. Now, contemplating his family gathered under the same starry sky, he understood the profound truth of that thought. What had begun as obligation had transformed into the most precious gift, the opportunity to love and be loved without reservations or conditions. As the night advanced, enveloping the estate in its protective mantle, Adelaide and Elliot remained seated in the courtyard, hands intertwined, sharing that complicit silence that only exists between those who have truly seen each other, beyond masks and defenses. A silence that paradoxically contained all the important words they had exchanged and the many more they would still share in the years to come. Oak Ridge Estate would continue transforming, adapting, evolving with each generation. But its essence, that unalterable core of authenticity and respect for tradition combined with openness to the new, would remain intact. Like the finest wine, extracted with care and patience from fruits that have slowly matured under the California sun, the story of Elliot and Adelaide would continue enriching the lives of those fortunate enough to know it. And in each bottle of wine that left the estate, in each experience shared with visitors, in each new project undertaken, would persist the fundamental lesson they had learned together, that the most valuable tradition is one that knows how to evolve without losing its essence, and that the most enduring love is that which is built day by day, overcoming fears and tearing down walls, until finding that rare and precious clarity that only emerges when we dare to be completely vulnerable before one who has proven worthy of our trust. As Eliot had once said, contemplating the century-old vines, time is the secret ingredient that no modern technology can replicate, and time, patient and generous, had transformed their marriage of convenience into a union of souls that now shone with its own light under the starry sky of Napa Valley.